Okay, so welcome everybody to our session. I'm going to introduce our presentation and our speakers. We are going to have the privilege of hearing Navigating the Storm, Exposing Extremist Tactics to Defend Intellectual Freedom. And this will be given by Kathleen Phillips and Russ Hall from Penn State University. So I will pass it over along to them.
Thank you, Derek. Hi, everyone. I'm Russ Hall, and with me today is Kat Phillips, my erstwhile research partner. Our other research partner, Joel Burkholder, couldn't be with us today. He is on a well-deserved vacation. So we are really delighted to be here today. Thank you so much for having us. Derek, thank you for that great introduction. And you know, my mom told me I'd never make it to Broadway, and yet here I am. So unfortunately, it doesn't get so funny after that, because this is pretty rough stuff. But we are going to talk to you today about what we have found in our research about extremist tactics that are being used mainly against libraries for banning books, programs, displays, etc., or attempts to shut them down, things of that nature. So I am a librarian at Penn State Bear End, which is in Erie, Pennsylvania, which is about as far away from New York City as you can get and still be in Pennsylvania, or up on the lake. I always say we put the bad kids in the corner, so that's why I'm up here. And so what are our bona fides other than we've been doing research on this? After getting tenure, I kind of returned over the past, well, a lot of years at this point, to my reason for getting into librarianship in the first place, which is intellectual freedom. I just am a big believer in ideas and that ideas matter. In 2022 and 2023, I was chairperson of the Pennsylvania Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. And it was eye-opening. I knew a lot, but I got to talk to people on the ground level facing these challenges, and gave me a lot more insight into the things that actually aren't being reported. If you saw Professor Drabinsky's earlier, there's a lot that goes unreported, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So I'll hand it off to Kat to talk about how her and Joel came to this work.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for attending our session today, and we're really excited to be speaking with you all. I work with Joel Burkholder. I worked obviously with Joel and Russ for some time, but Joel and I started our research journey back in about 2019, really wanting to look at student perceptions of bias and what bias is as a verb, as a noun, and how they interact with it. And that led us down the rabbit hole of the fact that we talk about bias all the time, and we expect people to know what bias is, how to interact with it, how to identify it, how to account for their own biases, but we don't actually teach them how to do that to begin with. So our research has kind of really gone in this really interesting kind of back and forth seesaw movement there with bias and it as a concept. And we started talking to Russ a lot about, what was going on with book banning. We have several colleagues here at Penn State who are looking at challenge data, and it's been a really interesting journey to really go down these rabbit holes. And we do frequently tease Joel, since he's not here today, I get to say this, that when you think of how this looks as we're going through all these processes and following all these different paths, it very much is that, cork board in a dark room with all of the red strings, right? That just connect all the points from one to another. So that is what we've been doing, and that is what has brought us to this presentation today.
So, I'm going to assume that if you're here, you are familiar with all the horrible things that have been cast against librarians and teachers over the past several years, just because we are behind freedom of ideas. You know, that, hey, you want to read a book about something? Here you go. And apparently, because we realize that gay people exist, you know, we are grooming children, and we're pedophiles, and we are going to be putting them in sex trafficking rings, right? And all these sorts of horrible things, because, you know, murder and rape are about the most horrible things, right? But child rape and child murder are definitely worse. So, you know, you really can't make much worse accusations. And some people think this is just, you know, political talk, or just, you know, whatever, you know, this just people talking to get people riled up. Well, not really, because if you do the next slide, Kat. Bomb threats are actually picking up around the country. Now, so far, they've only been threats. And we have examples from Iowa, from Chicagoland, from the central New York. One was Ithaca. There was also, I think, Luzerne Lake, New York. But Minnesota, California, Pennsylvania, lots of places. And then there's the ones that don't get reported on, like an example from when I was chair of the Pennsylvania Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. We had a person come in during Pride Week and scoop up as many of the books off of a display as he could. And as he was leaving, the employee at the desk asked him if, he told him you need to check those out. And he turns out he turned a little bit and patted the 5-inch hunting knife he had on his hip, and said, "I don't think I do." And luckily, they were able to get him out of the building. The director was there. He de-escalated the situation, and nothing bad happened. But needless to say, that's something that is really going to make you not want to do your job, I think. So there are actions coming out of this. This is, to me, I think of it as terrorism light, because they're trying to stop you through threats of violence. So thankfully, not much actual violence has been carried out.
So some of the issues at hand that we are going to talk about today are really, involving the fact that material challenges have increased and show no signs of slowing down. We have seen the WAC lane.
Oh, Kat, your microphone went out. Oh, you want me to take it? Okay. So I think, as many of you have seen, that with the ALA challenges, the report came out a few months ago at this point, but it's still very much an unfortunately upward trend on attempts at banning these books at these challenges. And the whole point is to create a moral panic and use the media to get this out there, to try to further make this fear spread across the country. Not just Florida, not just Texas, it's kind of everywhere. Again, and Kat had told me when we were watching the earlier presentation that we might have retitled our our presentation today what Emily said, because there's a lot of, we're gonna do a lot of callbacks, I think, to that. So, you know, that people are saying that, oh, well, we're not banning books, we're putting forth our parental rights. And, you know, we're worried about grooming, we're worried about indoctrination of liberal things. Kat, are you back? Can you talk?
Let's see, can you hear me now?
A little bit, you're a little quiet, but
Okay. Russ, I think I'm gonna have you continue forward for the moment until I can fix whatever.
okay, sure thing. So, important to remember here is that these are the fig leaves they're using, are these parental rights. When they're actually what they're trying to do is they're trying to limit access to things they don't think are right. And the way they're doing that, again, nationally, is that there are national groups that are providing local populations with heroic and ready-made rhetorical justifications, like, again, parental rights, or with child sex trafficking. I mean, Save the Children is where this all came from, that hashtag, which, I mean, what's more heroic than saving children? And, you know, you can do it from your own keyboard. So there's a lot there with that regard. And still can't hear you. And now I think you're frozen. Oh boy. So, if her computer's still on, we go next slide. There we go. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we actually get a creative approach, a proactive approach to this. We're going to start by understanding the frameworks they use, become aware of the tactics that they're using, and frankly, because we are on our back foot all the time with being attacked in these terms, is we need to rhetorically not engage with those frameworks. And we'll talk in a little bit about how we do that. So if we get the next slide, there we go. So some of you may have heard of Emily Knox. She's a professor at the I School at Illinois. Our theoretical underpinnings come from her. If any of you know her and could get us a introduction, Joel would probably lose his mind if he got to talk to Professor Knox. So she's really quite brilliant. So that is, in her book, and she has plenty of articles too, is focused on First Amendment implications of book banning. And as you can see from the quote, is to take the arguments of the challenger seriously. And the important thing about that is to remember that most of the people are coming to this honestly. They are concerned about children. They are concerned about, you know, from their own moral viewpoint, from their worldview. You know, it's impossible to say how many with things like this, but it's our guess is that it is a vast majority of them, and then that there are 20% that are true believers and activists, and a few more who are sort of the moneyed interest. Because as with many things like this, as with many things with misinformation, at the bottom is a grift in one way or another. It's either money or power in one way or another. But largely, we have to think about these challengers as working from a rational, systemic point of view. And next slide, Kat, if you can hear me. Thanks. So the themes that Professor Knox identifies are that society is on the decline and children's innocence must be protected. I think Save the Children is pretty clear about that. More interesting is, to me anyhow, is perhaps that public institutions are public symbols of the community. Therefore, they should reflect my beliefs, what I think is true. So if they're public institutions, I'm paying the tax dollars for these public institutions like schools, public libraries. You need to put the, reflect that. Well, what they often don't come to the conclusion of is that they absolutely should, be in charge of what their children do, but it's not their job to be the parents of all of the other families in the community. And finally, something that I think we actually agree with the challengers on is that reading is a powerful practice. And it does have effects, and that ideas are important. However, I think that most of us here would believe that it's sort of the long-term exposure to these things where you read and you read something else and you read something else. And I think that's what we call education. But the challengers are more of a reading is magic. And if you read something that tells you that gay people exist, there are trigger words that will turn your child gay. So it's sort of a different way of considering the same thing. And Kat has a different headset on, so maybe she's back. Let's see. Give it a test.
Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Oh, excellent now.
Oh, delightful. Just in time for my turn. So we had heard, as Russ had said, from Emily earlier about some of the different challengers that we are interacting with. But we have really started to look at some of these different networks of challengers. So I'm not sure if anybody has read, we're not sure if anybody had read or had seen the article from the Washington Post that came out a couple months ago, that they had done a study that really found 11 people were about 11 people were responsible for more than half the challenges and over 1,000 challenges, right? So we are seeing this as small groups with big impact or individuals with big impact. Some of the groups that we have been looking at more closely would be groups like Utah Parents United, thinking about Mary in the library and Laverna in the library, and where that has stemmed from, in part from Utah Parents United, Moms for Liberty, as Emily was talking about earlier, and Parents Defending Education. And other things that we're seeing as well are, really looking at how these groups are interacting with legislators and different political entities, and how those political entities are then in turn circling back and interacting with us through libraries. So one interesting thing that happened here in State College, there are several towns within our county, right? And one of them is Bellefonte, is one of our neighboring towns. And we are seeing that we were getting, or colleagues of ours were getting pamphlets and flyers in the mail when it came time for the Bellefonte school board elections to come forward. That particularly had to do obviously with school board members, but at a time that the school libraries were seeing an uptick in challenges in State College in Center County, Pennsylvania. And what we found was these were all coming from New York. These were all coming from different legislators in New York to influence a Pennsylvania school board. So again, when I said that there are lots of red strings that connect all of the dots on a corkboard in a room, there really are. So because this is an interactive presentation, we wanted to give the audience an opportunity to share, some of the different things that you've interacted with. Who are the challengers that you know of, and have you interacted with any individual challengers, or have you interacted with some of these bigger groups, or have you looked at some of these bigger groups? Please feel free to unmute. Hopefully you will not have the technical issues that I was having just a couple minutes ago. Third time's a charm. I had to go dig in a drawer and find this. Or please feel free to drop anything in chat as well. And as you can see, Russ had said in chat that these are just a tiny pool of examples. We've been looking at, other groups and other individuals as well. But we'd be curious to hear what you've experienced in your roles. So I'll give everybody a minute. Or if you haven't, please do share that as well.
And if you're shy, you can put it in the chat too. That's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, that's fine. Awesome. Nanette.
Hi, I'm Colleen from California, and I've been sort of following. So I'm an academic librarian at UC Santa Cruz, and I'm the chair of our Librarians Association. And we put on a little program on censorship, so we and book bans, and so we kind of looked into this topic. And one of something that inspired this, I was going to say impetus, but something that inspired this was a local thing that happened, and it wasn't quite a book ban, but it was a challenge to a curriculum. I can show myself that I found pretty taken aback by. So I'm from the local area. I'm from Santa Cruz County, and I grew up in South County, and it's a predominantly Latino community, and there's a lot of different communities that migrated there over the years that were farming communities, and Filipinos among them. And the university developed a curriculum. So the local research university developed a curriculum that had highlighted Filipinos in the community. And so there was an article sometime in the fall that was about a challenge to that curriculum because of the EDI focus of the curriculum. And it was called anti-Semitic. So there was there's like a group of folks who I think are doing something similar, but it's along the anti-Semitic lines. And I think the university, the professors associated with it, like, whoa, I don't think we really experienced that in this part of the country. And so it really took people aback. And I think they actually withdrew the curriculum, which was pretty surprising. That they, that was a response, and it sort of just died there. I think I haven't kept up on it, but that was an instance where it's like, wow, this power just swept in and targeted this curriculum. And it was really sad to me because I think there aren't many resources that address Filipinos in our community. So it was just like, wow, like what a lovely thing. And so, it was that was something that happened in our community. And it's different because it's interesting because it's not the typical like kind of polarizing book challenge that we've been seeing, but it just, yeah, it's there, too, I guess, mobilizing and kind of putting this impression out there about like the interpretation of the folks who challenged this was like, this is anti-Semitic. And it was it may have used elements that I think might elevate that argument in that level, but it wasn't. I mean, as far as I understood it, was there was nothing in there that was anti-Semitic. So, anyway, so that was something interesting that came up.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And I think that this does go back to what Russ and I were kind of, back channel chatting about a little bit while Emily was speaking was, what Emily said, that, a challenge to a curriculum is a challenge to reading material and to other materials as well. So Derek, we have time for one more.
Okay. I haven't had any challenges that I'm aware of, but I know one of my colleagues here had one. And keep in mind, like, we're at an urban community college. We're right across the river from Manhattan, and we our students get free access to the New York Times. And my colleague asked, the student, as my colleague was showing them how to sign up, and the student wasn't doing it. And the student said to my colleague, well, I don't want to look at a a left-wing liberal-minded paper like the New York Times. So, which I thought was kind of sad to to hear that. Considering, like, well, first of all, it's a free resource, and it's been around for so long, and it has a very good history. To hear that was to hear that challenge to one of my colleagues about it was disheartening, really.
Absolutely.
And I want to say that gets to part of the thing about the reading is magic. If you would read an article from the New York Times, you're automatically going to become a centrist or something. It's what a horrible thing. Again, reading is transformative, but it doesn't work that fast. So and I did want to, before we move on, though we can be here just fine on this slide, but something else that Professor Drabinski said during her keynote that I want to get back to was, generally speaking, we have not had many challenges in academic libraries. I think it was about 2% out of the recent bunch. But that doesn't mean that it's not on its way. I think it's just this, like I said, the grifts behind a lot of this is usually power or money. And I think, if you've been watching the news, or in your case, and for those of you in New York going outside your door on your campuses, there's a lot going on. And you can see in the certain media elements and that this has been exploited already. This moral panic is happening again. And it's going to be an easy jump, I think, for it to go to library materials, unfortunately. But on the other hand, also remember what Emily said was, if someone comes with a book, and it's just one book, and they have questions about why we have it, yeah, it's absolutely our job to talk to them about it. It's those ones that come in with the stack of 500 challenges, that were put together by a legislator in Texas. Yeah, that's not what we're doing. So enough with that. But anyhow, that's we'll move on here to where we actually this is our case study, where the University of Scranton, or not University of Scranton, but Scranton Public Library, as you can see on the left-hand side there, is a rather neatly unfolded newspaper. This was sent in a manila envelope from an actual patron of Scranton Public, torn out, and it had a Post-it note on it that said, "Shame on you." And so, again, as my role on the Intellectual Freedom Committee, I heard about this, and I talked to Scott, and he had said, that this was very strange, that this was put in newspapers mailboxes of this newspaper, PA Catholic Tribune, which he had never heard of, was put in people's mailboxes. And this was right before the midterm elections in 2022. And as it turns out, if we go to the next slide, I think, we can see that it has targeted a lot of the books that, you think you would see normally, such as All Boys Aren't Blue, Genderqueer, Flamer, things like that. And this lead-in language, Pennsylvania Public Libraries, once gave Nancy Drew Lake mysteries to book-loving students, and now promoting a new genre, child sexualization. No, we're not. And it turns out, PA Catholic Tribune has nothing to do with the Diocese of Scranton or the Catholic Church. Because Scott, the head of Scranton Public, he talked to them almost immediately, and they're like, no, this is terrible. And as he went on, he found that these were in, not just in, they weren't just sent. These were in lots of mailboxes. And it was not even, there was no postage on it. They were placed in mailboxes. And it was sort of, wow, this is really a organized way to go about trying to move this along. One other thing about that I really want to get across about the page with all the books. Can you back up one, Kat? Down below the synopsis and the cherry-picked quote, it lists the libraries in Pennsylvania that hold the book, the public libraries. And a lot of those are 1 or 2 person shops in small areas. And it's hard for me to even imagine the pressure you would get from friends and family in the community. And you do end up having, again, like Emily said, you do end up having people leave the profession, not just quit, but leave the profession because it's too much pressure. Even in bigger cities, we lost a great librarian in Williamsport. So, if we moved on, we just said, boy, this is something. I took this to Kat and Joel, and I said, this seems really weird. And so we decided what is going on? Do they have a web presence? And this is what we found was PA Catholic Tribune, which has not been updated in a very long time, about a year at this point, I think, and despite that, if you would go there now and look it up, we're here under Pope Francis's little headline there, says updated 1 year ago, 1 hour ago. It would still say it was updated 1 hour ago because it's not updated. Other things you might notice are that, looks like real announcements from different church bulletins. Well, it's because they just scrape them and dump them in there. And so it looks to a careful reader, like, I would hope we all are, we can figure it out. But to a not so careful reader, this could look legitimate.
So we would like to know in the chat, does anybody know what the colorful term for this type of journalism, in quotes, is? And if you do know, have you had this experience or have you seen this? So I'll open up chat for folks again. What is the colorful term for this? Who knew they were going to get quizzed during the first session post keynote in LACUNY? I can give you a hint. Think McDonald's. Not yellow. That's a good guess.
Certainly not golden like the arches.
No golden arches. Okay. So it is pink slime journalism. That is exactly what this is. So pink slime journalism is the practice in which news outlets, so we had journalism in quotes in the last slide, and news outlets in quotes in this slide, put together poor quality reports, which appear to be local news. So what this is really doing is a very interesting case of format laundering, where these resources, very much like the PA Catholic Tribune website and the flyer that they sent out, that looked like it came from a newspaper, printed on that type of paper with that quality, with the text, with the font, right? So as we think about this and how we're seeing the hijacking of reputable news sources, it is also incredibly ironic because frequently a lot of these groups, if we think about Laverna in the library, Mary in the library, Utah Parents United, some of the other groups that we had mentioned earlier, that these groups have a disdain for mainstream news sources, and they, however, are banking on the trust of people who see this, and this is, this is clickbait, right? This is exactly what it is. They're banking on the trust of the format of this resource, and also the ease of reading those titles of those headlines on the website. Or the ease of just being able to go through, oh yes, I found my library. Where's my library? I can look at it in all those lists. And oh my gosh, look at this quote from this book. It's a terrible book, right? So they're taking this format and they're hijacking it to create resources that they know people are just gut instinct inherently going to trust. But that is pink slime journalism. So if you didn't know that, you have a new rage bait. I like that term. I have not heard that one.
Rage bait, it works. It's fueled by rage bait.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
because
Thank
it's
you.
also with rage sharing,
Mhm.
because then you share these things, and then that gets it. We're actually working against our own interest by sharing. Look, can you believe that they did this?
Yeah. So this is where we're really going to start pulling on that thread and use that thread to create our red thread across that whole corkboard. So Russ, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
So I'm going to move pretty quickly through the next few slides because I think we're a little bit behind on time. But Joel, as we said, likes his red yarn and corkboard. And when I let him loose on it, he was, I had found the domain registrar was Epic, who is the one who, when everybody deplatformed extreme right-wing sites after the January 6th insurrection, Epic is the one who picked them all back up. And, I did things like the regular About Us, right? And it's just a phone number to the American Catholic Media Company and the privacy policy. And the phone number there, it's just an answering machine. It just gives you no way to leave a message or anything. It just says you've reached American Catholic Media Company. And then finally I said, well, privacy policy never says anything, but it didn't say American Catholic Media Company. It gave links to ACMC, which is obviously American Catholic Media Company. And we saw it was owned by Brian Timpone. And so, Kat, if you can go through the next one. This is just looking at there's Epic as and the organization is Anonymize Inc. So they're doing some sloppy trying to cover their tracks here. The next page, this was the About Us, and and give them a call and you'll just get that answering machine. No way to leave a message. And a big thing that I skipped, and I shouldn't have, is that it is all the American Catholic Media Company links are a closed loop, almost entirely. Because when you look it up, you get Michigan Catholic Tribune, Minnesota Catholic Tribune. Muckrack is a thing for journalists, is a little different than PA Catholic Tribune, Florida Catholic Tribune. And that's the way with every link on all of these pages. So it's a closed system. Then here the policy, and then from this, I'm like, all right, well, let's see who ACMC is. And Dun and Bradstreet tells us that they're owned by Brian Timpone, and the principal, right? And Brian Timpone, we don't expect anybody else to know this, but because we have been steeping in this cesspool of awfulness for a long time, Brian Timpone owns a whole network of things like this, which I'm a little surprised we didn't jump to it earlier when we were looking at this. And this is his wiki page, and I might be taking over Kat's slide here. No, I'm not. But you can see, if you take a look at it, he operates nearly 1,300 conservative, and I would put it in scare quotes, local news websites. Because some of it, yeah, they are, like I said, they scrape. They scrape things, and according to the New York Times, which is Derek's friend's student said, might make him think bad things that aren't from the right wing media ecosystem, say that Timpone's operations are rooted in deception and do not have the hallmarks of news reporting. They pay for articles from outside groups, which when we looked into a little further, yeah, apparently at least in one operation of his, they're paying, and it comes back to the Philippines, they're paying people in the Philippines 16 cents an article to write articles about these. And Metric Media is the big one of his companies that he owns. And then if you look at the end, yes, it comes down to right at that same time, he was putting out Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin. Swing state Catholic tribunes might be the ways to look at that.
So this is watching it all unravel, right? So we're looking at this and we're like, we find the Wikipedia page, which did confirm everything we had already been finding. We know that other people are doing similar deep dives that we've been doing, but when we were talking to our colleagues, here at Penn State, basically everybody we talked to were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, right? So we know that this is not something that's necessarily going to be a new concept to everyone, but if you don't have the time or you're not doing research in this, you don't necessarily see all of those red yarn connections between everything. So when we search the same language, what are the kids reading? We did find the Arizona Catholic Tribune, which is promoted by Metric Media, which is also owned by Brian Timpone. And shocker, when we think about hijacking format, not only are we hijacking format, we are seeing pretty much carbon copies of these websites appearing. So another thing that we found as we've been doing this research, that we don't have in here specifically, but we are finding different groups are creating template websites, essentially, that they are saying anybody can go out and say, here's the template, we'll provide the content for you, or the content will be scooped or put on here for you, and you can run these sites with little to no site experience, site management experience, and we're seeing something similar to this, that it is a carbon copy from the PA Catholic Tribune here on the left and the Catholic Tribune of Arizona here on the right. And very much like the Archdiocese of Scranton came out and said, nope, we did not put this out. That flyer wasn't from us. The PA Catholic Tribune is not associated with us. The mailers were posed as Catholic newspapers in Arizona as well. So this is not something that's just happening in Pennsylvania. This is something that's happening at a national level. So this brings us to this point where we wanted to open it up to the group again to say, well, now what? Like, what do we do now? And I think Emily touched on this and she talked about it a bit. Again, as we were like, what Emily said. But as we're thinking about this, I do think that it is very important for us to remember that, we all only have so much time in the day. And how are we going to be interacting with this? Do we want to interact with this? What's the outcome of doing the research? What do we hope to share with people? So what do you think the now what is? If you want to say, yep, I agree with Emily that, we really should be interacting with people. We have suggestions as well that we'll get to, but this is our final audience feedback point here. And then we'll share our thoughts on what some of the next steps are. But what do you think you would do as we're at this point of the now what? So we now see some of these red strings all connecting back to one person, Brian Timpone, with these different resources, or we see all of these strings connecting back to one group that's creating, website templates that, parents can go to and print out, lists from. There are Excel documents that you can just go into that are shared on these platforms. So what do you think the now what points are? Now what? Now what do we do? What are some of the strategies we can embrace or employ? Go ahead, Jamie.
I just had a question about those instances where the local diocese and the Catholic churches made a statement that they were not their publications. Did they ever go beyond just making a statement saying they're not affiliated? Would they ever proposition themselves as a potential ally to stop the spread of this information?
Whoop, I'm sorry. As far as I'm aware, they did not. They came out and made the statements, but that's a really, really great question. Thank you for asking, because that's not necessarily an avenue that I've looked into. Russ, if you have a different answer other than we're pretty sure no.
I don't believe so. I mean, they were, as far as Scott told me, they were very open to tell anybody who would ask about it, but it was not like beyond that. I don't think it was a big push, but that's a really good point, because building partnerships is a big thing.
So that brings us to our suggestions of the now what steps in this. And Russ, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
So, some of the things I think that are important to think about is, again, we are on the back foot. We're on the defensive on a lot of these things because we're the ones being attacked, right? When I say we, I mean libraries and librarians everywhere, regardless of your library type. So what I think the important thing to do, and I think Kat as well does, and so does Joel, is that we don't engage on those terms. We engage on our own terms. We need to make the proactive case for libraries, because and we need to de-escalate as best we can. If somebody's like right there and super hot, and really upset about something, and then you need to delay and say, well, this is something that you make an appointment, we can talk about, where I'm not going to get in a yelling match with you right here. But you also need to say, well, you don't just go to the, well, you're grooming kids, and I mean, how are you going to respond to that? You're going to say, of course I'm not. Well, then you're just in a loop of yes, huh, nuh-uh. And that's just going to fuel them even more. So if you can step out, and this is not easy, really, even if you get a delayed conversation later, if you can step out and say, well, no, we're just, we're providing books, information to people. I mean, and this display of I'll use Filipino example. I'll just say we had if we had a display about Filipinos in our community, and that was bothersome to somebody. Well, we're not, advocating for a Filipino takeover of our community. We're advocating that, these people in our community are seen, because we have all these books and it's easy to get not seen. And, we need to make these positive case for libraries. And importantly, we need to do this on the broader, on the broader scale and beforehand too. Because it's a lot easier if we can get out and talk to like town councils or, borough councils, whatever you have, talk to your alderman. It just depends on what what you have, but make that proactive case for libraries and try to make sure that you're fighting on good ground ahead of time. And make sure that, you know, you're not fighting a battle on ground that where you've got the low ground, so to speak, which is, you know, so set the stage, make it your stage. Don't let it be their stage.
Yeah. And some of the tactics that we've talked about with some of our public library leaders here in the state have been, you know, having those kind of training sessions with their employees or discussions with their employees and other approaches so that people aren't caught off guard and don't necessarily have that immediate reaction, that they have something like, we hear you. This is a conversation that you need to have with the director. We're happy to set up a time with you. Or if we're at an institution, I wonder, going back to Annette's point earlier, that maybe, you know, when it was that curriculum challenge, maybe people just felt so caught off guard that they really, and I don't know, right? That was the first time I had heard about that happening. But maybe, you know, when you feel caught off guard and you feel kind of cornered, sometimes, you know, the solution in those moments is to just not engage, right? So, you know, we know that this isn't easy, and we know that our suggestions of set the stage aren't the only suggestions or the only, you know, ways that people can feel empowered to interact, you know, or to engage, and how we can have these really proactive approaches with people ahead of time, right? So it is less about being on the back foot and more about trying to have that voice in the forefront of people's minds. So Russ and I would like to thank everybody for your time today.
I have
and
one
for
more thing
coming
to
today.
say.
Oh, never mind. We don't thank you. I retract my thanks.
The
Russ
real
can
quick
say
thing I want
that.
to say is back to something else Emily said. She said about, you know, networking and teamwork.
Mhm. Yeah.
Please, you know, try to reach out to at least one of your local librarians, public library or school librarian. And even if you don't do anything else, ask them how they're doing. And, you know, and then maybe you can do some things together, because heaven knows I wouldn't do this stuff on my own, because there's a real chilling effect with Kat and Joel and I about, do we really want to do this? I mean, we're parents, we have young kids and some older kids too. And do we want her to get doxxed? You know, I mean, things like that. It's tough, but you know, teams are better, groups are better.
Mhm.
So what Emily said.
We're not in this alone, and
All
our
right, now
colleagues
we
aren't
thank you.
either. Yes, now we thank you very much. We have a little bit of time for questions. We could take a couple, so please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, drop them in chat, anything like that. And we do thank you so much for everything. And if you'd like to reach out to us at any point in time, we are happy to talk to people beyond.
Absolutely.